You are now watching On Point, a news and public affairs show from California State University Northridge.
Hello and welcome to On Point. I'm Michael Hall. Over the past 50 years, California's population has grown increasingly urban. Today, around 95% of Californians live in metropolitan areas where there's fewer than 10 people per acre. Recently, populations have grown around freeways that were built in the 50s and 60s. The lead author of a study published in the Journal of Wildlife Management, Megan Jennings, states that threats from wildfires and urbanization in Southern California are two very large stressors for wildlife populations within the region. California has diverse wildlife and ecosystems, with 9 national parks and various state parks offering habitats for different species. Ecoregions can be divided into 4 groups: the desert, Mediterranean, forested mountains, and coastal forests. However, urban expansion may pose a threat to wildlife and their habitats. That is the story we'll lead off with first tonight. We are met here today with Korinna Domingo, the Director of Conservation Programs at the California National Wildlife Federation. Thank you for joining me.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you. So, Korinna, what inspired you to get involved with the wildlife conservation?
Oh, wow. I'll try and be short on this one.
Okay.
But, you know, I grew up with folks like Steve Irwin on the television. He was on my TV, and that was really my first connection to nature as a kid growing up in Los Angeles. I didn't necessarily see the wildlife that was all around me. I didn't grow up really camping all that much or in nature. I didn't have a family that went birding. But Steve Irwin really got me interested at a very young age in crocodiles specifically, and from there, wildlife in general.
Thank you for that, Korinna. So, moving forward, what would you say are the biggest misconceptions that comes with the California wildlife that people may have, whether that be positive or negative? What's your input on that?
Yeah, I think there are so many misconceptions and misperceptions on wildlife throughout the state of California. I do a lot of my work with large predators like mountain lions and use mountain lions as a sort of umbrella species to talk about coexistence with all wildlife in Los Angeles, like coyotes, bobcats, foxes, raccoons, and so on. And so some of the misconceptions are just generally about wildlife behavior. Is it normal or not normal to see a mountain lion in my backyard? Is it normal to see a coyote during the daytime in your neighborhood? So that's a lot of my work, is working with communities to provide factual information that's based in science on wildlife biology, ecology, behavior, and what we can all do at home and on the trail to reduce our risk with wildlife in having a negative interaction.
Interesting. Thank you, Korinna. So, what would you say is the biggest threat that California wildlife is facing today? What would you say?
Yeah, I think a lot of issues surrounding the conservation of many species in California really do come back around to habitat loss and fragmentation. There are also other anthropogenic causes of mortality for California's wildlife. We can talk about mountain lions specifically. There are a lot of road fatalities as a result of our disconnected and disjointed islands of habitat that are throughout the state of California. So we lose about 100 cougars a year on our roadways. Another big issue is environmental toxicants. So I know it's been in the news a lot lately about the dangers of rodenticide and how we can all be better neighbors to wildlife by not using poison for rodent management. Mountain lions and other predators throughout the state are also killed on depredation, or when a mountain lion or, let's say, a coyote may come into contact with a domestic animal and injure or kill them. Over the last 20 years, we've lost about 100 cougars a year on depredation permits throughout the state of California, despite them being a specially protected mammal under Proposition 117. Stochastic or random events, like you said in your intro, like wildfire, are also definitely a cause of concern moving forward, especially with climate change. And a lot of the wildfires in California are actually human ignitions. So I know that that is a priority of the California Department of Fish and Wildlife and National Park Service in understanding the impacts wildfire and other random events can have on our local wildlife populations.
So, moving forward, So, the wildlife crossing that's being built over the 101 freeway, as we know, this is going to connect wildlife from one point to the next point, basically giving them more land to thrive and live. But also, this overpass is not going to be too far away from businesses, residential areas, things like that. And so, would you say that you are concerned that this can increase the chances of wildlife being with more residential areas and more businesses? Are you concerned about that? Why or why not?
Yeah, we get that question all the time. So the Wallace-Annenberg Wildlife Crossing that is being built in Agora Hills at Liberty Canyon is the first of its kind, and the first attempted in such an urbanized landscape. And as a result of that, there are communities living on both sides of this crossing, right? And so the wildlife crossing isn't going to create additional land for wildlife necessarily. I mean, the crossing footprint itself obviously will have an impact on the landscape, but what it's really allowing wildlife to do is it's allowing the wildlife, say the mountain lions in the Santa Monica Mountains, to be able to disperse north to the Simi Hills, with the goal of connecting to the nearest source population for mountain lions, which is the Santa Susana mountain range in the Los Padres National Forest. Similarly, it's going to allow mountain lions from that north population to go into that south population in the Santa Monica mountain range. So it's not necessarily bringing more mountain lions or more coyotes to people's backyards, because the truth of the matter is that the National Park Service has been studying predators in this area for many years, for over 2 decades. And what they have found through GPS collar data and remote camera data is that coyotes and mountain lions are already utilizing the areas on both the north side and the south side. And so what it's going to allow is that needed dispersal event to happen, because mountain lions and other species in the Santa Monica mountain range are experiencing inbreeding, which is a huge issue. And so it's going to allow that necessary gene flow in perpetuity.
We had a reporter, Rocky Walker, do further research with the wildlife crossing situation.
Los Angeles is fighting urbanization's effects on local mountain lions by building a wildlife crossing over the 101 freeway in Agora Hills. The goal is to improve genetic diversity among wildlife by connecting the Santa Monica Mountains to the Simi Hills. Right now, they're cut off by the 101.
It will reconnect basically islands of habitat, the Santa Monica Mountains, the Simi Hills, and then beyond. I mean, they were essentially severed by the freeways.
A decline in biodiversity has led to birth defects among mountain lions, and recently some of the lions showed on average a 93% abnormal sperm rate. With the low fertility rates, it's believed this wildlife crossing is the last hope for the area's mountain lions.
That entire ecosystem has been cut off by that freeway. The other side is the Pacific Ocean. Any mountain lions there, they're literally inbreeding themselves out of existence.
The wildlife crossing will expand over 10 lanes of the freeway, spanning from this side of the 101 all the way to this side. The crossing will give all wildlife here a better shot at survival. Some say this is just the beginning.
So we see that this fragmentation is not limited to the big guys like the cougars, but it affects them first. So this wildlife crossing is going to reconnect this ecosystem for all wildlife.
The Wallace-Annenberg Wildlife Crossing broke ground here in Agora Hills on Earth Day of last year and is set to be complete by 2025. I'm Rocky Walker, CSUN On Point.
Thank you so much, Rocky. Coyotes are a common predator in Southern California, preferring open land and sleeping above ground. They can often be seen in urban areas consuming pet food and possibly small animals. Some pet owners are concerned about the coyotes' presence and the risk they pose to safety. Just in December, a 2-year-old was attacked in Woodland Hills by a roaming coyote. The California Department of Fish and Wildlife estimates the statewide coyote population to be between 250,000 to 750,000, with the animals adapting to urbanization and becoming less afraid of humans. Dana Stangel here is from Taringa Ranch, an organization that educates Californians about local wildlife and teaches them how to coexist. Dana is the founder and executive director of Taringa Ranch. She is also a credentialed biology teacher. Thank you so much for joining me here today, Dana.
Thank you for having me.
So, Dana, we've heard a lot about why some people might view coyotes and raccoons as problematic. from your expertise, what are some benefits of preserving with the California coyote species?
Well, I think the question is, how do we feel about rats and mice, gophers, ground squirrels, all the rodents that surround us, right? If we like them and we want to encourage them, we should definitely get rid of the coyotes, because coyotes' favorite food is rodents here in Southern California. They eat rabbits, they eat rats, they eat mice, and so they have a very beneficial role in our communities.
So we're going to move on to our next question. So, Dana, there's some people, actually quite a few people, that think it's a good idea to leave food, maybe like pet food, outside of their homes for the wild animals. So, how do you go about educating people about this, as far as leaving food outside of maybe their backyards or front yards? And can you also explain if this is causing more dangerous encounters with these wildlife?
Well, as an organization that works to help people coexist with wildlife and their pets, we definitely do not recommend feeding any kind of wildlife in the backyard. When we put food out, when we put water out, these are attractants to wildlife. And when our pets are out there unattended, they are also attractants to wildlife. So, and the shared bowl, for example, you know, people think it's cute to take the picture of the cat and the opossum and the raccoon, right? Well, they're sharing diseases also. And if your pet is then eating out of that bowl, you don't know what's going to happen to your pet. But the bigger issue I see with feeding animals in the backyard is feeding birds. Bird seed falls to the ground, rodents come for the leftover seed, coyotes come for the rodents, and then they look over and there is a cat or a dog in the yard, and that's an easy meal for them. They're very opportunistic and they will take it.
Yes, thank you, Dana. So, Dana, are there examples you can give of species whose survival rate has improved because of people in Southern California making an effort to be educated about how to coexist with these animals?
There are a few amazing success stories that I can think of. One would be just the monarch butterfly, right? So many people care about this animal, they learn about this animal, and they plant native plants so that the monarch has a place to lay his eggs, a place to eat. More and more people are educating themselves about that, and we're hoping, you know, to bring back the monarch from the brink of extinction, pretty much. And we also have the California condor, we have the island fox. These are animals that groups of people joined around and literally brought them back from the brink of extinction. So I think educated, concerned community members can make a big difference for wildlife.
Those sound like some really great benefits, Dana. Would you say that there are other measurable benefits as far as this kind of education?
Well, you know, some of it's measurable and some of it isn't. I feel like maybe 10 years ago, people were completely outraged and surprised whenever they saw a coyote. They were shocked. And I think we've moved to a different place now as far as coyotes go, where we're not as shocked. We're more like, okay, what do I need to do now? And I think that's actually a huge step for the public to have taken in a short amount of time. We're accepting.
Thank you, Dana. So I noticed on your website for the Taringa Ranch that you guys also share information about something called human hazing devices that you usually show people for community events. And can you explain a little bit about what these human hazing devices are and how they're better to the alternatives of traps and killing these animals? Could you explain more about what human hazing devices are?
Exactly. Well, that's kind of what our organization is founded around, is coexisting without the use of traps or poisons or guns.
Right.
You know, those are easy answers for certain people. But humane hazing is where you are humanely hazing an animal or a person, doesn't matter. You're humanely dissuading them from an area or a space, or even your person, right? So we talk about personal humane hazing devices, might be an air horn or a whistle that you carry, and doing something unexpected. If wildlife is contemplating you, which usually they aren't, but it makes us feel better to be able to make a loud noise or make a movement that's loud and unexpected that would frighten them. So we talk to people about that. And then there's also humane hazing deterrence that could be in the backyard, where the human is not necessarily there. There's a motion sensing sprinkler, motion sensing lighting, certain scents. And these are ways that they're the opposite of an attractant in the yard, like the food or the water. And these are things that when wildlife comes to the yard, they might be less likely to stay because it's not very fun for them there. But it doesn't hurt them, and it doesn't touch them usually. It's more of a reaction and less of physical pain or something like that.
Thank you, Dana. Earlier, we spoke with a couple biology and ecology professors from CSUN campus. We asked about what can be done to try to combat the effects of urbanization has had on wildlife. Here's how they responded.
I think we have to fundamentally change the way we think about growth. And, traditionally it's been the urban sprawl, and everyone needs a house with a yard and, a fair amount of space. In every other major city, not every other, but most major cities, they grow up. And so we have to start, considering that neighborhoods don't look like they've traditionally looked in the 50s with the urban sprawl, but that you've got, a few more 4-story, 6-story, 8-story complexes in city blocks than we normally see, and that way you're not taking up as much real estate.
I think people have to be understandably accommodating that these animals are not out to disturb them, to bother them, and just let them be and not try and interact with them because they are wild animals.
As we move further out into the hills and to the mountains, deserts, and areas that are more wild, we're chasing them further and further up into these areas where they're still, somewhat natural.
For peaceful coexistence with them, hopefully civic leaders will think about restraining growth in the context of the human population to allow these animals to maintain places to live. Humans and wild animals have coexisted for tens of thousands of years. There's no reason why we can't. We just have to make possibilities and accommodations as best we can, given the impacts we've had on the habitats where they've historically roamed.
And we'll be right back after this.
There's so many rewards in life. You coming into our home was one of the greatest rewards we could have ever had.
It took 20 years, and I got my third child, who was 17 at the time.
It's so cool to watch the adult that you've become, and you really have done as much for us as you think we've done for you.
Feel the beat of nature at a park or forest near you. Find a forest and music inspired by nature at discovertheforest.org.
Welcome back, and thank you for watching CSUN's On Point. We're a student public affairs show, and we cover topics that are important to the community. Today, we're speaking about urban expansions affecting wildlife habitats. If you're a new viewer, thank you for joining us. So here we have Korinna Domingo, the founder and the director of the Cougar Conservancy, and Dana Stangel, the executive director of Taringa Ranch, who is also a credentialed biology teacher. So, as we know, we've discussed the new wildlife overpass being built. Obviously, a project like this is going to cost a lot of money. So, Korinna, do you believe that's something as such as an underpass, digging a tunnel underneath to allow these animals to cross, rather than the overpass. Do you believe that this is another possibility that we can see in SoCal to connect wildlife from point A to point B? And do you think a project such as this will be more cost effective?
That's a great question, and one we get all the time. So when the architects and Caltrans was looking at what the potential would be to, again, connect the Santa Monica's to the Simi Hills, they did consider an underpass. However, because this wildlife crossing has specific target species in mind, it was found that an overpass would be better, specifically for animals like the mountain lion and the mule deer in the area. They're less likely in certain circumstances to move through underpasses. However, underpasses are an amazing way that we can allow wildlife safe passage from one point to the other. Along the 118 freeway, just north of the crossing site that you were just talking about, they've done amazing retrofits that are really quite simple, and they were able to see the impact immediately by wildlife using them on the cameras pretty much right after they were done being built. So underpasses are great, but the Wallace-Annenberg Wildlife Crossing is a $105 million project, of which we have over 98% of the funding in. Not only does that go towards construction costs and construction maintenance, but it also goes towards research on the efficacy of the crossing, as well as community outreach and education, what we're here to talk about today, especially in regards to wildlife coexistence.
Thank you for your input as far as the underpass situation, and it makes sense considering, not all animals operate the same way, so that might be more comfortable for certain animals. So Dana, how do you feel about the underpass rather than the overpass? How do you feel about that?
I think, like Korinna said, each area beckons for its own kind of crossing, right? It really depends on the topography of the area. This crossing in particular was researched so thoroughly in advance about what could be done and what would be the least intrusive way to make everyone happy over there. And in this case, the overpass was the best option. We certainly see wildlife using underpasses throughout the Los Angeles area and Southern California. So they are, a viable option, again, in certain areas and for certain animal populations.
So, here lately, I've noticed that I've been seeing a lot more wildlife than usual than I did compared to when I was a kid. The hawk, for example, I don't know if you guys know, it's kind of brown, a brown looking hawk. I've been seeing those a lot more lately on a daily basis compared to how I did while growing up, because seeing one of those as a child, it was like a treat because I would rarely see them. So now I'm seeing them almost every day without even trying to spot one. So now I would say it's the equivalent of seeing a pigeon or a crow, in my opinion. So do you guys have any other similar experiences that you can possibly relate to this?
Well, right now it is actually nesting season for the raptors and the other birds of prey. So you are more likely to see them doing some crazy stuff and bringing some crazy stuff around town, because you just never know. And even the crows act differently this time of year than they do in the fall and the end of summer, right? So that's probably part of it. But also, I think all of us as wildlife lovers, we notice so much more as we get older. And I think COVID was a perfect example of that. We had so many calls during COVID. There's a coyote here, and I know he's never been here before, and I know that because I've never seen him. But the reality is, the animals didn't really change their habits as a result of COVID. Given more time, maybe they might have eventually, but I think the bottom line was everyone just slowed down long enough to have a look, and they started noticing some big crazy things going on in their yards. And I think the Ring camera also helps us notice wildlife more than we used to.
Thank you for clearing the air on that, Dana. I thought I was coming up with something, but thank you for clearing the air. That makes a lot of sense. So, regarding the hawks, I've also been seeing a few more coyotes than usual. not too long ago while I was dropping my grandmother off at work. I saw just 3. I would say, I guess they're called packs when they're in kind of a little group. And so, but they didn't show any aggression. Of course, I stayed in my car, of course. They didn't show any aggression. They were coming from a golf course that's close to her job. And there's ducks and geese, large bodies of water, grass, things like that. And so, would you say that considering having encounters like these, that it'll be wise to learn the do's and don'ts when encountering these wild animals, coyotes in particular, considering how you said more people have been calling as far as them? So would you say it would be necessary to learn the do's and don'ts, even if you're not expecting to come across these animals?
I think it's really important to know the do's and the don'ts, even when it comes to like walking your dog and coming across another dog that happens to be off leash for some reason, right? Like you need to be ready for situations like that. That's why having some kind of a noise-making device on your person when you go for a walk or a hike is a great idea. Having a person with you, all the things that you would do when you think about human predators, right, or off-leash dogs or whatever, like those are the things. It's not that special. I think the problem is that we live in fear of these animals, and it gets in our way of coexisting with them. We think that the mountain lion and the coyote are coming right for us, when really they were probably just running right by, you know? I think so it's the learning about these animals in every way that we can is definitely the answer to coexistence, because the animals haven't changed. They keep doing the same thing. It's our reactions to them that change over time.
Thank you. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, no, I agree with Dana. And, you know, I think that we were talking earlier about misconceptions, right? And I think it is one of the big misconceptions that simply seeing a coyote or a cougar is inherently an incident or a conflict, right? And so our job really as educators and as folks who work with the community to increase understanding is being able to let them know what is the realistic expectations for living with wildlife. You know, if you see a coyote on the campus here at CSUN, maybe you would do something differently than you would if you saw a coyote on the trail, right? And inevitably, the more information people have on what to do and what's safe for them and how to keep themselves safe and how to keep their dog safe, it's a win-win, regardless of how you feel about coyotes or cougars. If you can keep yourself safe, your children safe, and your dog safe. But at most of the time, though, when you have a wildlife encounter, it ends positively, right? Most wildlife encounters happen without you even knowing it, without you even having seen the coyote. Everyone is so in their cell phones. Even when people hike, they put their ear buds on, they listen to podcasts. And so I think it really is just about having general awareness of your surroundings, and a lot can come from just being situationally aware.
Yeah, speaking of that, thank you for that, Korinna, because I think a lot of people don't realize how elusive these mountain lions might be and how hard they are to come across and how well they can camouflage despite their large size. Because I've said many times they could be looking right at you and you wouldn't even know. And so, yes, thank you for that. We'd like to thank both of our guests. Thank you so much for being with us. The risk taken when urbanizing wildlife is a serious issue that we as a society need to take as seriously as these two wonderful individuals. We hope you've learned a little from our guests and everyone we talked to about this complex topic. Thank you for joining us. I'm Michael Hall, and this is On Point.